He lived alone for 12 years, hidden deep in the frozen mountains. No friends, no family, no future. They called him a ghost. But one night, a knock shattered the silence. A woman stood in the snow, holding the hand of a little girl who looked just like him. Her words were simple, but they changed everything. "Ezra, this is your daughter." From that moment, the world he buried came roaring back to life. What follows isn't just a story about survival. It's a journey through guilt, redemption, and the unbreakable bond between blood and forgiveness. If you've ever felt alone, if you've ever believed it was too late to start again, this story is for you. Stay till the end, because the last 10 seconds might change how you look at life itself. Snow whispered across the mountains like an unfinished prayer. The wind had a voice here, a low, endless murmur that only men who'd chosen silence could hear. Ezra Blackwood listened to it the way others listened to music. Out here, it was the only sound that mattered. For 12 years, he'd been alone. No visitors, no calls, no mail. Just the rhythm of his breath and the crunch of snow beneath his boots. His cabin wasn't on any map. That was the point. After the war, after the fire and sand and screams, he'd walked away from everything. His unit, his family, his name, and buried himself in the Oregon wilderness, where the world could forget him just as easily as he'd tried to forget it. The locals in the nearest town called him the ghost on the ridge. No one ever saw him for long. Twice a year, he came down in his old truck, bought supplies, paid in cash, and left before anyone could ask questions. People learned not to pry. He liked it that way. Isolation wasn't punishment. It was control. But that day, something felt off. The storm had started early, sweeping down from the Cascades faster than he expected. Fat flakes drifted through the air, spinning like ash. His headlights carved a pale tunnel through the whiteout as the old pickup crawled along the unpaved road. The radio hissed with static, then caught a fragment of the local news. 2 hikers still missing north of... The rest dissolved into static. Ezra turned the dial off. Missing hikers were common this time of year. The mountains had a way of swallowing the careless. Then, his satellite phone, silent for months, suddenly lit up. The screen flashed an unknown number. He stared at it, frozen. Only one man had this number, his former commanding officer. They hadn't spoken in years. His thumb hovered over the button, then dropped. The phone buzzed until the call died, and silence reclaimed the truck. He exhaled through his nose, the breath fogging the air. "Not my world anymore," he muttered. His knuckles whitened on the steering wheel as the truck climbed the final stretch toward his hidden road. The engine groaned. The snow deepened. This part of the mountain belonged to no one but him, and he liked it that way. By the time the cabin appeared through the curtain of snow, night had swallowed the valley. The small log structure stood dark and solid against the drift, smoke curling faintly from its chimney. A place built for one. Not comfortable, but safe. Familiar. The only constant in a world that had gone wrong a long time ago. Inside, Ezra moved through his routines with practiced precision. Supplies stacked, shelves organized, rifle checked, generator fueled, everything in order. That's how he survived. Not by hope, but by habit. Rice, beans, coffee, ammunition, medical kits. Every item had its place, every action a purpose. Predictability was peace. He poured a small glass of whiskey, the one indulgence he allowed himself, and sat by the window, watching the snowfall. Outside, the forest was still, too still. Usually, by this hour, he'd hear the ravens calling from the pines. 3 of them, every day. But tonight, nothing. He frowned, setting the glass down. The silence pressed closer, heavy and strange. He'd lived too long in places where silence meant danger. Ezra rose, went to the window, and scanned the tree line through the gathering dark. His pulse quickened. Not fear, but instinct, the old soldier in him waking up. Something was moving out there. Or maybe the snow played tricks. Maybe it was just the wind shifting through the branches. He turned away, shaking off the thought. It didn't matter. Nothing human ever came this far up the ridge. Still, when he locked the door that night, he checked it twice. Hours later, the dream came back. The same one that haunted him every winter night. Sand instead of snow. Fire instead of wind. His men calling for him. Voices muffled by the roar of artillery. He saw Martinez, smiling even as blood pooled beneath him. Heller, humming some country tune that would never end. Abramson, the kid who wanted to be a doctor. They were all there, all dying again. His hands useless, his training inadequate. Ezra woke with a gasp, drenched in sweat. The cabin was dark except for the flicker of dying embers in the stove. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing like gunfire in the stillness. 3:17 a.m. He never slept after the dreams. Outside, the storm had quieted, but the silence was different now. Charged, waiting. Ezra moved through his morning ritual by lamplight. Push-ups, pull-ups, squats with his pack weighted down by stones. Then coffee, strong and bitter, while he stared out at the snow that buried his world. He didn't know why he felt it yet. The shift in the air, the tremor beneath the calm. But something in his bones told him this peace, this silence, was temporary. Somewhere down the mountain, in a place where the radio still played and phones still rang, someone had spoken his name aloud. And before the next storm fell, before the ravens came back, that name, the one he'd buried, was about to knock on his door again. The storm hadn't let up by nightfall. It pounded the cabin roof in a steady rhythm, 1,000 icy fists against the old pine shingles. Ezra sat by the wood stove, a book open but unread in his lap. The fire's orange light flickered across his face, deepening the lines carved there by years of solitude. Outside, the forest groaned under the weight of snow, its voice muffled, distant, and strange. Then it happened, a sound that didn't belong. At first, he thought it was the wind, shifting direction. But then came another noise, sharper, deliberate. A knock. Ezra froze. For 12 years, no one had ever found his cabin. No one had ever knocked. He listened. One knock, then another. Firm, intentional. Whoever stood outside wasn't lost. They were certain. He rose slowly, every muscle tense. His instincts roared awake like old machinery grinding back to life. He took his rifle from the wall and approached the door, his boots whispering against the wood floor. He didn't breathe, didn't blink. The third knock came louder this time. Hello? A woman's voice, muffled by the storm, but clear enough to make his heart jolt. Is anyone there? Please, we need help. We. Ezra's pulse spiked. There was more than one. He edged closer to the small window beside the door and peered out through the frost-laced glass. In the dim porch light, he saw 2 figures trudging through the snow. A woman, tall, slender, wrapped in a tattered coat, and a smaller figure clinging to her side. A child. A child shouldn't have been up here. Not in this weather. Not this far from civilization. Ezra gripped the rifle tighter, indecision clawing at his mind. He could pretend he wasn't home. Let them pass. Let the storm take them, as the mountain took everything uninvited. That would have been the easy thing, the safe thing. But then came a cough. Small, fragile, wet. The kind of sound no medic ever forgets. Ezra swore under his breath. He lowered the rifle. When he finally unlatched the door, the wind shoved it open with a howl, flinging snow into the room. The woman stood on the porch, face flushed from the cold, breath hitching in sharp bursts. Her gloved hand gripped the shoulder of a young girl, maybe 9 or 10, bundled in an oversized coat that barely held back the storm. "Please," the woman gasped, her voice trembling with exhaustion. "She's sick." We've been walking for hours. Ezra's mind was already working, assessing. The girl's lips were pale, her coughing ragged. Not frostbite yet, but close. Hypothermia creeping in. He stepped back. "Get inside." The woman hesitated. "You are Ezra Blackwood?" The name hit like a cold wave down his spine. He hadn't heard it spoken aloud in years. "Who are you?" he demanded. "Cordelia," she said softly, as if the name itself might break. "Cordelia Thorne. We met a long time ago." Ezra's throat went dry. Memories flickered like old film. Portland streets in the rain, a paint-splattered apartment above a bookstore, laughter over coffee, her hands always smudged with color. That was before the desert, before everything went wrong. "I don't know anyone by that name," he lied automatically. His voice was cold, but his heart raced. Cordelia's gaze didn't waver. "I wouldn't have come if it wasn't important." She glanced down at the girl beside her. "Ezra, this is Juniper." The child looked up at him, shivering, eyes wide and green-gray, the same gray-green as his own. Eyes his mother once called mountain water eyes. "She's your daughter." The words hung in the air like smoke. Unreal. Impossible. Ezra's brain refused to process them. He shook his head. No, that's not." Cordelia stepped forward. "We can talk later. She needs warmth first." Ezra's body moved before his mind caught up. He ushered them toward the stove, shutting the door against the wind. The warmth hit them in waves, melting the frost from their clothes. He gestured to a chair near the fire. "Sit her there," he said, grabbing blankets from the cot. "Get her boots off." Cordelia obeyed without a word. Juniper's feet were red, her small hands trembling as he wrapped them gently. She looked up at him with a faint, brave smile. "It's warm here," she whispered. Ezra cleared his throat. "Yeah, you'll be fine." He turned to Cordelia, his voice low. "You said you walked here? From where?" "We were stranded. Our car slid off the service road about 2 miles from your turnoff. The engine died. I tried calling for help, but there's no signal out here." "You shouldn't have come this far," he muttered. "This place isn't—" He stopped himself. "Never mind." Cordelia met his eyes, her voice steady despite the exhaustion. "I didn't come here by accident, Ezra. I came to find you." His jaw tightened. "You shouldn't have. Maybe not. But I did." She reached into her coat and pulled out a small, worn photograph. It was curled at the edges. The image faded. Him. Years younger, smiling, his arm around a woman's waist. Her. Ezra stared at it, speechless. The wind howled again outside, as if echoing the chaos inside his chest. Juniper coughed, breaking the silence. Ezra's medic instincts surged to the surface. "She's running a fever," he said, touching her forehead. You should have gotten her to a hospital. There wasn't time, Cordelia whispered. I thought you'd know what to do. He did. That was the problem. As he measured out medicine and checked her breathing, the old patterns came back. The ones he'd buried. The precision. The calm. The feeling of saving someone, if only for now. When he finally looked up, Cordelia was watching him. You haven't changed, she said softly. He wanted to argue, to say he'd changed completely, that the man she knew was gone. But the look in her eyes told him she didn't believe that. And deep down, neither did he. The girl's breathing steadied. Her small hand rested on his sleeve. Thank you, mister, she murmured, half asleep. Ezra swallowed hard. He didn't correct her. Outside, the storm screamed. Inside, the past had found him. Morning crept into the cabin, pale and uncertain, like a guest unsure if it was welcome. The storm had passed, leaving the world outside silent again, buried in white. Ezra stood at the window, watching the first light glance off the drifts. He hadn't slept. He hadn't even tried. Behind him, the faint rustle of blankets stirred. The girl, Juniper, coughed softly, then shifted under the pile of quilts near the stove. Her hair, a mess of auburn tangles, caught the glow of the fire. Cordelia sat beside her, still in yesterday's clothes, eyes shadowed from exhaustion. She looked older than he remembered, thinner, her face lined with years she hadn't been meant to carry. But her eyes, they were still the same, sharp, alive, and full of secrets. Ezra poured hot water into a dented kettle. The sound filled the silence like a bridge between strangers. There's oatmeal, he said quietly. It's plain, but warm. Plain is fine, Cordelia replied, her voice hoarse. She hesitated before adding, Thank you for letting us in. He didn't answer, his mind still tangled in disbelief. Your daughter. The words kept replaying, refusing to settle. He glanced toward the girl again. Her small hand twitched in sleep, fingers curling the way his did when he dreamed. He looked away quickly. When the kettle whistled, he poured 3 mugs of weak coffee, setting one in front of Cordelia. Talk, he said. Start with why you're here. Cordelia wrapped her hands around the mug as if stealing its warmth. After you deployed, she began slowly. I found out I was pregnant. I tried to contact your unit, but the report said you were missing in action, presumed dead. Ezra's jaw tightened. They weren't wrong. I thought so too. She paused, her eyes flickering toward Juniper. I raised her alone. My family, they didn't take it well. I dropped out of art school, moved from city to city, took whatever jobs I could. It wasn't easy. He leaned back in his chair, expression unreadable. So why now? Why come looking after all this time? Cordelia's gaze dropped to her coffee. Because I'm dying. Ezra's stomach turned. He said nothing. Lung cancer, she continued. Stage 4. They caught it too late. I've got months, maybe less. I can't leave her alone in the system. She's all I have, Ezra. The kettle still hissed faintly on the stove, the sound filling the hollow space between them. You should have told me sooner, he said, his voice low. I could have. He stopped. He didn't know what he could have done. He'd barely kept himself alive. Cordelia looked up, her eyes glossy but steady. You weren't meant to know. You had your ghosts. I wasn't going to be another one. He wanted to be angry, to accuse her of lying, of manipulation, but the weight of her exhaustion silenced him. She wasn't performing. She was emptying out what little truth she had left. Juniper stirred, her voice small and sleepy. "Mom?" Cordelia was instantly at her side. "I'm here, baby. Go back to sleep." The girl blinked up at Ezra, curious, cautious. "Are you the man from the picture?" Ezra froze. "What picture?" Cordelia hesitated, then pulled from her bag a folded photograph, edges frayed. She handed it to Juniper, who clutched it like treasure. The image was faint, but unmistakable. Ezra, younger, arm around Cordelia, both smiling at something just out of frame. He looked at it as if it belonged to someone else entirely. "I don't remember that day," he murmured. "I do," Cordelia said softly. "It was the only time I saw you laugh." Juniper smiled sleepily. "You used to laugh." "Once," Ezra admitted. The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile, but not quite. Cordelia watched him carefully. "She deserves to know who you are," she said, "even if it's just for a little while." He turned back to the window. "You think I can be a father? Out here? To a child I didn't even know existed?" "You don't have to be anything but present," Cordelia replied. "That's more than most people ever are." Ezra didn't respond. The words hit too close to something raw inside him. Hours passed in uneasy silence. He checked Juniper's temperature, still warm, but better. He cooked in silence, fed them, fixed a crack in the stovepipe. Routine was how he thought. Routine was safety. As dusk fell, Juniper sat cross-legged near the fire, flipping through one of his old field guides. "You have so many books," she said. "Do you read them all?" "Most," Ezra replied. "Keeps the mind from rusting?" She smiled faintly. "I like reading too. Mom says books are like secret doors. You never know what world you'll step into." He nodded. "She's right." Juniper tilted her head, studying him. "You don't smile much." "Not much to smile about." The honesty in his tone seemed to surprise her. "Mom says you helped people," she said softly. "In the war." He looked down at his hands. Scarred, steady, still capable. "I tried." Juniper's next words came like a whisper. "Maybe you can help us now." Ezra's throat tightened. He turned away before she could see the flicker of emotion in his eyes. Later that night, when Juniper had fallen asleep and Cordelia sat quietly by the fire, Ezra spoke again, his voice barely above a murmur. "You're sure she's mine?" Cordelia nodded. "You can see it, can't you?" He could. The eyes, the tilt of her head, even the stubbornness in her tone. The proof was staring him in the face. Still, he whispered, "If this is true, why now? Why not send a letter? Why not ask for help before?" Cordelia looked into the fire, her face lit by its trembling light. "Because I knew you'd say no, but I also knew that once you saw her, you wouldn't." Ezra said nothing. He couldn't, because somewhere deep down, he already knew she was right. Outside, the ravens had returned, 3 black silhouettes perched in the trees beyond the clearing, watching, waiting. The storm was over, but something far greater had begun. The days that followed fell into a fragile rhythm, a kind of truce between 3 strangers bound by blood, lies, and the unforgiving quiet of the mountains. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world of glittering frost and clean air that burned the lungs when you breathed too deeply. Ezra worked as he always did, splitting wood, checking traps, clearing snow from the solar panels. But now, wherever he turned, there was movement, sound, life. Juniper. She followed him like a shadow, her small boots crunching behind his in the snow. At first, he tried to send her back inside. Too cold, too dangerous. But the girl had a stubbornness, that made her impossible to ignore. She watched everything, asked questions about everything. Why did snow sparkle? Why did birds vanish before storms? Why did he live so far away from everyone else? He answered in short, clipped sentences at first, but over time, his replies grew longer, almost without realizing it. Maybe it was her voice, soft, curious, completely without judgment, that disarmed him. Or maybe it was something simpler. Maybe, after 12 years of silence, he was just tired of hearing only his own thoughts. "Why don't you have a TV?" she asked one morning as they fed the ravens outside. The birds cawed and flapped, black wings cutting against the white sky. "Reception's terrible out here," Ezra replied, scattering feet on the porch rail. "Then what do you do all day?" she asked, squinting up at him. Her cheeks were pink from the cold. He shrugged. "Work, read, stay alive." "That sounds lonely." He almost laughed at that. Almost. "Sometimes," he admitted. Juniper tilted her head, thoughtful. "I think lonely people notice more things. You see stuff that others miss." Her words lingered in his mind long after she'd gone inside. He found himself looking at the world differently that afternoon. The patterns of animal tracks in the snow, the quiet hum of the wind through the pines, the delicate frost that clung to the cabin windows. She was right. Loneliness had made him an observer. But now, someone else was watching with him. Inside, Cordelia had been quieter since that first night. She spent long hours sitting near the fire, sketching in a worn notebook, her hand trembling slightly as she worked. Sometimes she coughed, a dry, rasping sound that made Ezra wince, but she waved off his concern with a tight smile. "I've had worse," she'd say, and he wanted to believe her. But something wasn't right. The way she moved, the flicker of her eyes when she thought no one was watching, the little orange bottle he'd glimpsed once in her coat pocket, all of it gnawed at him. He told himself it was none of his business. He told himself his job was to keep the girl safe until they figured out their next step. But the medic in him couldn't ignore the signs. Late one night, after Juniper had fallen asleep, he heard it, the soft clatter of pills against glass, the faint sound of someone whispering to themselves. He froze, listening. Cordelia's voice, trembling. Just one more, just to get through the night. Ezra's heart sank. He knew that tone. He'd heard it before, in the desert, from soldiers who couldn't sleep without chemical peace. He closed his eyes. "Damn it, Cordelia," he muttered under his breath. The next morning, she was bright and alert. Too bright. Her eyes were wide, her movements restless. When Juniper wasn't looking, Ezra studied her with the quiet focus of a medic assessing a wound. The signs were all there: pupil constriction, erratic speech, the faint tremor in her hands. This wasn't cancer. It was addiction. He didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, he poured his energy into Juniper. If Cordelia's world was unraveling, he could at least give the girl something solid to hold on to. He started teaching her survival. Real survival. How to build a fire from damp wood. How to tell weather by the way clouds moved. How to follow a trail without leaving one behind. She absorbed every word, every gesture, as if each skill was a secret passed down through generations. When they tracked deer prints through the snow one afternoon, Juniper grinned up at him. "It's like reading a story," she said. "You just have to know the language." Ezra nodded. "That's exactly right." She beamed. "Mom says I get my curiosity from her. Do you think that's true?" He hesitated. "Maybe. But curiosity isn't something you get from someone else. It's something you keep alive. She seemed to think about that for a moment, then nodded solemnly. Then I'll keep it. That night, as the wind returned, Ezra caught Cordelia staring at Juniper with a mixture of love and fear so raw it nearly broke him. He realized then that whatever demons she carried, her love for her daughter was real, fierce, desperate. The kind of love that burned itself alive just to keep someone else warm. Still, the truth pressed against his chest like a weight. If he was right, if she wasn't dying but addicted, it meant she'd come here with a lie bigger than the storm that brought her. He didn't know what was worse, that she might die soon, or that she'd already been dying for years, one pill at a time. As he watched her from across the fire, Cordelia met his eyes. For a moment, neither looked away. The silence between them said what neither dared to speak. Ezra turned his gaze back to the flames, jaw tight. He knew the truth now, and soon he'd have to decide what to do with it. Snow had begun to fall again, soft and quiet, the kind that erased tracks within minutes. The cabin glowed faintly from the stove's orange heart, a fragile pocket of warmth in an endless winter. Ezra sat at the table, sharpening his knife by lamplight. The rhythm steady, deliberate, anything to keep his mind from the truth he'd uncovered. Across the room, Cordelia hummed softly as she drew in her notebook, Juniper asleep under the quilts. It looked peaceful, almost normal. But Ezra knew better. The signs were too clear now to ignore. He'd seen her hands tremble that morning when she thought no one was watching. He'd caught the faint chemical smell on her breath, the dull sheen in her eyes. And when he checked the medicine bottles she kept hidden, his suspicion hardened into certainty. They weren't painkillers for cancer. They were opioids, potent, dangerous, and far too many. He waited until Juniper was asleep before speaking. "Cordelia," he said quietly, setting the knife down. "We need to talk." She looked up, startled. "About what?" "About the pills." The silence stretched thin between them. The hum of the stove, the whisper of snow outside, it all seemed to pause. Cordelia's voice trembled. "You went through my things." "I did," Ezra said evenly. "You lied to me." She flinched as if struck. "Ezra, He stood, his voice harder now, stripped of patience. "You told me you had lung cancer. You said you were dying." He grabbed the orange bottle from his pocket, shaking it so the pills rattled. "This isn't treatment. This is addiction." Cordelia's face crumpled, and for a moment she looked small, like someone crushed under the weight of her own choices. "You don't understand," she whispered. "I understand perfectly," he snapped. "You've been using. How long?" Her eyes darted toward the fire. "Since the accident, the one after Juniper was born. They gave me painkillers, and She swallowed hard. "I couldn't stop. At first, I needed them to sleep, then just to feel normal. And then, I didn't care anymore." Ezra stared at her, disbelief and anger warring in his chest. "So all of this, coming here, the story about dying, was a lie?" Cordelia's voice cracked. "Not all of it. I thought I was dying, Ezra, not from cancer, but from the life I built around it. I couldn't get clean. I couldn't keep a job. I couldn't keep her safe." She gestured helplessly toward Juniper. She deserves more than a mother who can't go a day without a pill. He wanted to shout, to demand how she could use a lie so cruel to get what she wanted. But when he looked at her, trembling and hollow-eyed, all he saw was someone drowning. someone who had tried to save herself the only way she knew how. But before he could speak again, a sound cut through the air, a sharp intake of breath. They both turned. Juniper stood in the doorway, barefoot, her blanket dragging behind her like a trail of snow. Tears streaked her small face. "You lied," she whispered. "You said you were sick. You said you were dying." Cordelia froze, her lips trembling. "Junie, please." The girl shook her head, sobbing. "You lied to him. You lied to me." She turned and bolted out the door before either of them could move. "Juniper!" Cordelia screamed, lunging forward, but Ezra was faster. He grabbed his coat and flashlight and threw open the door, the cold slicing into his lungs like glass. The storm had thickened again, erasing footprints as fast as they formed. He followed the small, erratic tracks through the snow, calling her name over and over. "Juniper, stop! You'll freeze!" His voice vanished into the wind. Panic clawed at his chest. The mountain was merciless. A child alone wouldn't last long. He found her minutes later, though it felt like hours. She was huddled beneath a cedar tree, her knees drawn to her chest, her breath shallow. Snow clung to her hair, her lips pale. Ezra knelt beside her, wrapping his coat around her small body. "Don't touch me," she cried weakly. "You both lied." He held her tighter, his voice breaking. "Your mom is sick, Juniper, but not the kind of sick that medicine can fix. People who love us, sometimes they're broken too. It doesn't mean they don't care." Juniper trembled in his arms. "She said she'd die soon." He swallowed hard. Maybe she meant the part of her that can't stop hurting. That part can die if she lets it. But the rest of her, the part that loves you, that's still here, still fighting. The girl sniffled, her tears mixing with snow. "You promise?" Ezra tightened his hold, shielding her from the cold. "I promise." When they returned to the cabin, Cordelia was kneeling by the door, sobbing into her hands. She looked up when they entered, relief and guilt battling in her face. Ezra said nothing as he carried Juniper to the fire and sat beside her until her shivering eased. Cordelia whispered, "I'm so sorry." Ezra looked at her, his voice low but steady. "Sorry doesn't fix what's broken, but it's a start." The three of them sat in silence, the fire crackling softly. Outside, the snow fell heavier, as if the world were trying to bury their secrets under a clean white sheet. For the first time, Ezra realized that redemption wasn't a thing you found. It was something you built, one truth at a time. The next morning dawned gray and heavy, the storm finally easing, but leaving behind a silence that seemed too large for the cabin. The world outside was a white expanse of untouched snow. Yet inside, the air was thick with exhaustion and unspoken words. Juniper slept near the stove, her face pale and tear-streaked, wrapped in layers of blankets that couldn't quite chase the chill from her small body. Ezra sat at the table, a cup of coffee growing cold in his hands. Across from him, Cordelia stared into the fire, her face hollow. She looked less like a liar and more like a woman who'd lost every weapon she had to survive. "You need help?" Ezra said finally, his voice rough but calm. Not pity, not forgiveness. Help. Cordelia didn't look at him. "I've tried, Ezra. Twice. Rehab, support groups, pills to replace other pills. It never lasts. The world out there, it's full of ways to fail. Then you'll try again," he said, firm. "Here." That made her look up. "Here? In this cabin? You can't be serious." "I am," he said simply. "You detox here. You get clean under my watch. I've treated men through withdrawal before. I know what it looks like." Cordelia laughed bitterly. "You're out of your mind. You think this place, this isolation, is the answer. It's control," Ezra said. "No doctors to manipulate. No pharmacy to walk into. No escape routes. You stay. You fight through it, or you go and leave Juniper with me." The last words landed like a blade. Cordelia's eyes widened, her lips parting in shock. "You'd take her from me?" "I'd keep her safe," Ezra said quietly. "That's not the same thing." Cordelia's gaze dropped to her hands. They were trembling again. She clasped them together to hide the shaking. "You don't know what you're asking," she whispered. "Detox isn't just pain. It's hell. It's every nerve screaming at once, every thought turning against you." "I do know," Ezra said, his voice low. "I've seen soldiers crawl through it. I've seen men break, but I've also seen them live." She stared at him for a long moment, the firelight flickering in her tired eyes. "And if I say no?" "Then you walk out that door," he said. "But you walk out alone." The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Finally, Cordelia reached into her coat pocket, pulling out the last orange bottle. She turned it over in her palm, staring at the pills that had ruled her life for years. Then, with a small, trembling motion, she placed it on the table. "4 left," she said quietly. Ezra nodded. "Then we start tonight." By nightfall, the cabin had changed. Ezra prepared the room like a field medic setting up for triage. Extra blankets, towels, water, a basin nearby in case she couldn't make it to the bathroom. He brewed willow bark tea for pain, lined up packets of rehydration mix, and placed a small lantern near her bed. Cordelia lay on the cot, pale but resolute. Juniper sat nearby, wide-eyed and anxious. "Mom," she asked softly, "will it hurt?" Cordelia smiled weakly. "Yes, baby, it's going to hurt. But it's a different kind of hurt, one that means something." Ezra knelt beside Juniper, his voice steady but gentle. "You're going to see things you don't understand, and that's okay. Your mom's body is going to fight hard. That's what healing looks like sometimes." Juniper nodded, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. "Can I help?" "Yes," Ezra said. "You can help me keep her warm. And when she sleeps, you help me keep the fire going." That night, the storm inside the cabin began. Cordelia's withdrawal came fast and brutal. Within hours, she was shaking, sweating, moaning in pain. Her body convulsed, as if trying to shed its own skin. Ezra stayed beside her, steady as a metronome, measuring her pulse, cooling her forehead, whispering instructions through her cries. "Breathe through it. It's your body remembering what clean feels like." At one point, she screamed, "I can't do this. Just one pill, Ezra." He met her eyes with quiet steel. "You already did the hardest part. You stopped lying. Don't stop now." Juniper cried silently from her corner, clutching her knees. Ezra wanted to send her to bed, to shield her from it, but he knew that this too was part of the healing. The truth wasn't something they could hide anymore. By the second night, the worst of the storm had settled into a grinding ache. Cordelia's muscles seized and trembled, her voice hoarse from screaming. Ezra brewed tea after tea, his hands steady though his own body trembled with fatigue. Juniper stayed close, wiping her mother's face with a damp cloth, whispering, "You're doing it, Mom. You're winning." On the morning of the 3rd day, Cordelia finally slept, a deep, dreamless sleep that came only after the body had fought itself to exhaustion. Ezra sat back in his chair, staring at her still form. He'd seen death before. This wasn't it. This was survival. Bare, raw, and earned. Juniper brought him a cup of coffee, her small hands trembling slightly. Is she okay now? She's alive, he said softly. And that's the start. Juniper climbed into his lap without asking, resting her head against his chest. You helped her, she murmured. You helped both of us. Ezra looked down at the child who carried his eyes. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a man holding a broken world together with his bare hands. But maybe that was enough. Outside, the sky had cleared. The mountains gleamed under a new coat of snow, untouched and full of light. Inside, for the first time in years, Ezra felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel: hope. The morning after Cordelia's first deep sleep, the cabin was still. Outside, sunlight bounced off the snow, piercingly bright after days of storm and shadow. Ezra sat by the window, hands wrapped around a steaming mug, watching light spill through the trees. For the first time in weeks, the air inside the cabin didn't feel like it might collapse under its own weight. Cordelia stirred slowly on the cot, blinking against the light. Her face was pale, but her eyes were clearer, less clouded by pain or craving, more aware of where she was. Is it morning? She whispered. Ezra turned, his voice calm. It's more than that. It's the first day you've had without poison in your veins. She stared at him for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether that was a victory or a punishment. It doesn't feel good, she murmured. It's not supposed to, he said. Not yet. From the small alcove, Juniper sat up, rubbing her eyes. When she saw her mother awake, she scrambled from her blanket and ran to her side. Mom, you're awake. You slept so long. Cordelia smiled weakly, brushing a hand over her daughter's hair. I know, sweetheart. I think I dreamed of sunlight. Juniper grinned. It's here now. See? She pointed toward the window, where the mountains gleamed like new silver. For a moment, the three of them sat together in that quiet, the kind that doesn't demand words. It was fragile, yes, but real. A kind of peace built from survival, not comfort. Ezra rose to prepare breakfast, the smell of oatmeal and wood smoke filling the room. Cordelia tried to sit up, but her body protested. Ezra noticed immediately. Don't push it, he said. You're still weak. I can help, she insisted. Then talk, he said without looking back. Tell her something true. Cordelia frowned, uncertain. What do you mean? Anything, Ezra said. Something you haven't said before. Something honest. Cordelia hesitated, then looked at her daughter. I used to draw you when you were a baby, she said softly. When you were asleep. I was so afraid of the world then, of what it would do to us. So I kept you safe on paper. I thought if I could draw you, I could keep you. Juniper tilted her head. Can I see them? Cordelia smiled sadly. They're gone, lost in one of the moves. But maybe I can draw new ones now. Juniper's face brightened. Can you draw me with Dad? She asked innocently. Ezra froze for a moment at the word. Dad. It hit him with a weight he hadn't expected. A single syllable that cracked open something deep inside him. He didn't turn around, didn't let them see his face. Maybe, Cordelia said, if he wants that. I don't sit for portraits, Ezra said gruffly. Juniper giggled. Then I'll draw you both. Cordelia chuckled, a soft, genuine sound that filled the room like sunlight through frost. Ezra let it happen. He didn't join in. but he didn't stop it either. By afternoon, Cordelia could walk short distances. Ezra helped her outside, careful and steady, his arm supporting her as they stepped into the crisp air. The sky was a flawless blue, the kind that only came after the storm had taken everything else. The forest was silent except for the occasional crack of melting ice. Cordelia looked around, eyes wide. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's quiet," Ezra corrected. "Quiet is beautiful," she said. "I think I forgot that." Juniper followed, her small boots crunching over the snow. "Can we go to the clearing?" she asked. Ezra nodded. "Stay close." They walked slowly toward the edge of the woods, where the snow lay deep and untouched. The world felt new, suspended between endings and beginnings. Cordelia leaned against a tree, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. "I don't deserve this," she murmured. Ezra glanced at her. "Deserve what?" "This. Another chance. You helping me. Her forgiving me." He looked down at Juniper, crouched nearby, tracing shapes in the snow with a stick. "No one deserves it," he said quietly. "You just take it when it comes." Cordelia watched him for a long moment, then nodded. "You've changed, Ezra. The man I knew wouldn't have let us through that door." "That man's dead," he said flatly. Cordelia shook her head. "No, he's right there. He just stopped hiding from himself." They stood in silence for a while, listening to the forest breathe around them. When they finally turned back to the cabin, Juniper ran ahead, her laughter carrying through the trees. Ezra watched her go, something like warmth spreading through his chest. He realized he hadn't thought about leaving once that day. That night, the fire burned low. Cordelia sat sketching at the table, Juniper asleep once again beside the stove. Ezra cleaned his tools quietly. When he looked up, he saw what Cordelia was drawing. It wasn't Juniper. It wasn't him. It was the cabin, their small world, glowing softly against the darkness. But in her drawing, there were 3 figures silhouetted in the light, not separate, together. She caught him watching and smiled faintly. "It's not perfect," she said. "It's honest," he replied. Cordelia nodded. "Honest is enough." They sat in silence again, the kind that no longer hurt, the kind that simply existed. Outside, snow began to fall, gentle this time, not cruel. And for the first time in years, Ezra Blackwood didn't see it as a prison. He saw it as a beginning. The peace they'd built was delicate, like frost on a window, beautiful but fleeting. For days, the cabin felt different, softer somehow. Ezra spoke more, Juniper laughed more, and even Cordelia began to look less like someone running from death and more like someone walking toward life. Each morning, Ezra woke before dawn, his old habits still ruling him. But now, when he stepped outside to split wood or check traps, he wasn't alone. Juniper trailed behind him, bundled in her too big coat, her curious eyes wide as she watched his every move. "Can I try?" she asked one morning, pointing at the axe. Ezra hesitated, studying her. "You're too small for this one, but I'll teach you the basics." She grinned as he showed her how to hold the handle, how to feel the balance before the swing. The lesson wasn't really about the axe. It was about focus, control, and patience. She listened intently, absorbing every word. Cordelia watched from the porch, wrapped in a blanket, her face soft with pride and exhaustion. Her recovery wasn't easy. The nights were still long, filled with tremors and cold sweats, but she faced them without pills, without escape. Each sunrise was a small victory, one that Ezra found himself quietly celebrating with her. By the second week, Cordelia was strong enough to move around more. She helped with chores, cooked meals again, even sketched by the fire in the evenings. For the first time since she arrived, her laughter sounded unburdened, like something she'd forgotten she could do. It was during one of those quiet nights, as the snow fell gently outside, that the knock came. It was sharp, deliberate, and completely out of place in their world of silence. Ezra's head snapped up instantly. Cordelia froze, the pencil slipping from her hand. Juniper stirred in her sleep. Another knock, louder this time. Ezra stood slowly, his instincts firing before thought could catch up. He moved to the window, peering through the frost. Headlights cut through the trees. 2 vehicles, half buried in snow. One was a county SUV, the other marked with a faint decal he couldn't make out. "Someone's here?" he said quietly. Cordelia's face went pale. "Who?" Ezra didn't answer. He grabbed his coat and stepped to the door, cracking it open just as a woman's voice called out from the porch. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm Patricia Reeves, Child Protective Services. We need to speak with you." Behind her, a sheriff's deputy stood silently, the beam of his flashlight sweeping across the clearing. Cordelia's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh, God." Ezra opened the door fully, his expression neutral. "Come in. It's cold." The woman entered cautiously, brushing snow from her coat. She was middle-aged, sharp-eyed, but not unkind. "I apologize for the intrusion," she began. "We've been looking for a mother and daughter reported missing, Cordelia and Juniper Thorne." Ezra's jaw tightened. "They're here." Patricia Reeves nodded, pulling out her notebook. "And you are?" "Ezra Blackwood," he replied. "Juniper's father." That made her pause. Her father? That's not documented anywhere. "Wasn't until recently," Ezra said. "She and her mother arrived 2 weeks ago." Ms. Reeves glanced around the cabin, her eyes assessing every detail. The fire, the sleeping child, the food stores, the hand-built furniture. Her tone softened slightly. "This is remote. It's safe," Ezra said firmly. Cordelia stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Please, we weren't running. We just needed time. I wanted her to know her father." The social worker's eyes narrowed, professional instinct kicking in. "Ms. Thorne, reports indicated you were gravely ill. Terminal cancer, correct?" Cordelia swallowed hard. "That was a lie," she said quietly. "One I'm not proud of. I was sick, yes, but not with cancer." "Addiction," Ezra added plainly. Ms. Reeves blinked, then jotted something in her notebook. "And you've been detoxing here?" Cordelia nodded. "For 11 days. Ezra helped me. I haven't used since." The social worker's gaze lingered on her face, assessing the truth of it. After a moment, she turned toward Juniper, who had woken and was watching silently from the cot. "And how have you been, sweetheart?" she asked gently. Juniper hesitated, glancing at her mother, then at Ezra. "Better," she said. "Mom's getting better. Ezra helped her, and he teaches me things, like how to follow tracks and make tea from bark." Patricia Reeves smiled faintly at that. "That sounds interesting. You like it here?" Juniper nodded. "It's quiet. It feels safe." Ezra felt something tighten in his chest at her words. The social worker finished her notes and closed the folder. "Mr. Blackwood, Ms. Thorne, I can see that Juniper is well cared for and safe for now, but there are still procedures to follow." "Meaning?" Ezra asked evenly. "Meaning we'll need formal paternity testing, documentation of living arrangements, and a medical evaluation for Ms. Thorne's recovery." Juniper's missed several weeks of school. Until everything's reviewed, she'll remain under temporary supervision. Cordelia's voice broke. You're not taking her away. No one's taking her tonight, Patricia said calmly. But this situation needs oversight. I'll be making my report within 48 hours. Expect a follow-up. Ezra nodded. Understood. When she and the deputy left, their vehicle's lights fading into the forest, silence reclaimed the cabin. Cordelia sank into a chair, her hands shaking. It's over, she whispered. They'll take her. No, Ezra said quietly. Not if we give them no reason to. She looked up, tears in her eyes. You can't fight the system, Ezra. He leaned forward, his voice steady as stone. You fought your own body and lived. You think I can't handle paperwork and questions? Cordelia let out a weak laugh through her tears. You make it sound so simple. It isn't, he said, but it's worth it. Outside, the last of the sunlight bled from the horizon, leaving only the soft glow of the cabin against the endless snow. The piece they'd built was cracked now, fragile, but not broken. Ezra glanced at Juniper, who was sketching quietly by the fire, her small hands steady. Then at Cordelia, who was learning to breathe again without lies. He'd spent 12 years running from the world. Now it had found him again, knocking at his door. But this time, he wasn't planning to hide. The days that followed felt lighter, though not easier. The visit from Child Protective Services had left behind a tension that hovered in the air like smoke after a fire. Ezra knew that one wrong move, one misunderstanding, could undo everything they had fought to rebuild. But beneath that fear, something else had taken root. Determination, hope, the kind that doesn't shout, but hums quietly beneath the surface, steady and unyielding. Cordelia moved slower these days, but her steps were surer. The tremors had faded, and her eyes, once glassy with lies and longing, now held a fragile clarity. Each morning, she would join Ezra and Juniper outside, watching as the girl fed the ravens or traced animal tracks in the snow. The mountain no longer felt like a prison to her. It felt like a classroom, a place where pain and purpose could finally meet. Juniper thrived in that stillness. She woke early, eager to learn. Ezra taught her how to read the stars, how to build a shelter from fallen branches, how to listen, not just with her ears, but with her whole being. She'd repeat his lessons to her mother in the evenings, and Cordelia would sketch them out on paper, a hand-drawn record of everything they were becoming. Ezra found himself smiling more often. He didn't notice it at first. It was subtle, like thawing ice, but Juniper did. You laugh now, she told him one afternoon as they worked together, melting snow for water. Do I? He said. She nodded. It's a nice sound. You should do it more. He tried to play it off, but something warm flickered in his chest. For years, he'd believed he'd buried that part of himself. But Juniper's laughter, bright, unstoppable, was a mirror he couldn't ignore. A week later, Patricia Reeves returned. Her SUV pulled into the clearing, tires crunching over the frozen ground. Ezra met her outside, steady, prepared. Cordelia waited by the door, Juniper clutching her hand. Mr. Blackwood, Patricia greeted, stepping out. I appreciate your cooperation. I've reviewed your file. Ezra nodded. And? Her expression softened. The paternity test confirmed what I suspected. Juniper is yours. Cordelia let out a shaky breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Patricia continued, her tone even. I've also reviewed Cordelia's medical reports, and her recovery plan. You've both been honest, which goes a long way. I'm recommending supervised reunification with joint guardianship, regular check-ins, school enrollment, therapy for both mother and child. Ezra listened, nodding at every word. He'd fought wars before, but this was one worth surrendering to. We can do that, he said quietly. Patricia smiled, closing her folder. You already are? She paused, glancing toward Juniper, who stood watching from the doorway. You have a remarkable daughter, Mr. Blackwood. She's resilient. She gets that from her mother, Ezra said. Cordelia's eyes glistened, but she said nothing. When the SUV disappeared down the road, a strange quiet filled the clearing. Not fear this time, but release. The world had seen them and chosen not to take everything away. For once, mercy had found its way up the mountain. Spring came late that year, but when it did, it transformed the land. The snow melted into streams that sang through the trees, the forest floor alive with green shoots and wildflowers. Ezra watched as Juniper planted seeds in the patch of soil near the cabin, her small fingers pressing them gently into the earth. What are you planting? He asked. Wild mint and asters, she said proudly, for the bees. He chuckled softly. Smart choice. Cordelia sat nearby, sketchbook in hand, drawing the scene. She'd grown stronger, her cheeks no longer hollow, her spirit steadier. You should plant something too, she said to Ezra. He raised an eyebrow. I plant trees, wood that lasts. Cordelia smiled. Maybe it's time you plant something that grows faster. He thought about that, then took a handful of seeds from Juniper's small tin. Together, they knelt in the dirt, side by side. The soil was cold, but the sun was warm on their backs. It was enough. Days passed. The seeds sprouted. The mountains came alive with sound again. The rush of meltwater, the call of birds, the laughter of a child echoing through the trees. Ezra built a small table outside where they'd eat breakfast together when the weather allowed. Sometimes, Cordelia would read aloud while Juniper listened, and Ezra would close his eyes, letting the words wash over him. He didn't think of the past as much anymore. When he did, it no longer haunted him. It simply reminded him how far they had come. One evening, as the sun sank behind the ridgeline, painting the world in gold, Juniper tugged at his sleeve. Ezra? Yeah? Are we staying here forever? He looked out over the valley, the river gleaming, the smoke curling gently from their chimney. Maybe not forever, he said, but long enough to make it mean something. She smiled at that, the kind of smile that made all the cold years worth enduring. Then I'll plant more flowers tomorrow, she said. Cordelia joined them on the porch, her sketchbook tucked under her arm. You know, she said softly, I think we all needed this mountain more than it ever needed us. Ezra nodded. Maybe, but it's not the mountain that saved us. Cordelia tilted her head. No? He looked at Juniper, then back at her. It was what we found when the world finally went quiet. The three of them sat together as night fell, the air cool and clean. The forest glowed faintly under the moonlight, alive and breathing. And for the first time, Ezra understood what survival truly meant. It wasn't hiding from pain. It was choosing to live, even when life had forgotten your name. The snow has melted. The mountain stands quiet again. But in that cabin, once filled with ghosts, there's laughter now. The sound of a child growing. The whisper of forgiveness finally spoken. Ezra Blackwood thought his story ended in silence. But life had other plans. It sent him a storm. It sent him a knock at the door. And it sent him her. Because sometimes, the people we save aren't strangers. They're the ones we once turned away. If this story touched something inside you, don't let it fade. Share it. Let someone else remember that healing is messy, but it's real. That broken people still build beautiful things. That love, once found, can rebuild a life.